Hello, welcome to video number 2 of the EMF reader build. What we're going to do is we're going to install all the false parts on the front and a few active ones on the back. Let's install the front rotary. It's centered here. Drop into place and solder this up. These rotaries do come in a couple of different styles for the pins on the back. If it doesn't exactly fit, snip off the ones that don't fit and solder the ones that do fit. This is a dummy part. It doesn't do anything, so it doesn't really matter where you install it. It's not screen accurate because on the show this is blacked out, so eventually we'll use a paint pen to black out this area. Next up are these two blue potentiometers. There's a specific place they need to go. If you look, you can see where it says meter adjust. What we're going to do is push this through so it fits through that spot there. So I can see that I put those pins into that exact spot. Push that down and solder. This is a functional part. This is how we adjust the meter strength. So it has to go in this exact spot. We'll trim those up using the flush cutters. Then we'll go on to the second one. You can see it's the same thing. And you can see that I put those pins in that spot there. We'll solder this guy in. We'll just trim up this last part. If these are a little crooked, you can just take a pliers and rotate them so they look nice. Let's move on to the next piece. The top square capacitors. They go in an arrangement of yellow, white, yellow, yellow. From the back side, you can see that there's these square boxes all the way across. And that's where these are going to fit in. So if you look, those pins in those square boxes. We can go across the line and solder them all in. Snip the excess lead. You see that not all the pieces are exactly square. We can just bend those with the pliers and put them into place. And we have them all in a row. Perfect. The next pieces we'll put on are the sound modules. This is what the soundboard looks like. It comes with 2 pin headers. We're only going to use one. What we'll do is drop the pin header into here, and we'll notice that it's 2 pins too short. So we'll snip off the 2 pins. For aligning this board, the USB is going to face outward, but you can also double check. VIN goes to VIN below it. Ground, RL, ground. Match this, ground, RL, ground. Let's solder the soundboard in. I like to hold this board while it's drying. It sits even with the bottom board instead of resting at an angle. We've soldered the top side of here. So it has 1 pin header on the side here. We're going to trim the excess pin lengths. Okay, we're left with a nice flush surface of all the pins trimmed. So again, we'll drop this in, making sure that we're only poking it into the VIN to A ground and not getting it out of alignment. Then we'll flip this whole thing over and solder the back side. So we have the soundboard firmly in place. We can move on to the amplifier chip. Will actually sit over top of our program chip, and it will sit over top of it just like this. And we're going to use the pin header that came with it. Looks like 1 pin too long again. So on this side, because it's going to be floating upward a little bit, we're going to solder this side on first. So we have the pin header for the amplifier soldered in place, and we can drop the amplifier over top of it. And we can check that the A plus symbol goes to the A minus symbol, the SD symbol goes to the VN symbol, the ground symbol goes to the ground symbol on the amplifier board. We drop that over top. Trim the excess leads. Okay, for this next part, we're going to start making the coils. I like to use a power drill to wrap the coils. We'll start with the red magnet wire. We have the P-clips. Put the P-clips onto the antenna. Okay, we're just going to hold it up to the board and align it with the screw holes so that our P-clips are the right distance apart now. And we're going to take some stove bolts, and then we'll squeeze it down and hold it in place with the bolts. And we're not tightening it, we're just making sure that the P-clips aren't going to move. And we'll double check it one more time. Looks good. Got our power drill. What we're going to do is just thread a little bit of this guy into a P-clip. We're going to unravel this in a nice fashion across the way. And you'll see our electromagnet's going to develop. And when you get to the end, you're just going to double back, and we're going to go 2-3 times just so there's a good coating. I'll clip off the end and thread that through next to where we started, because we're going to twist these two guys together. And we're left with a electromagnet antenna. Very cool. At this point we can take our bolts back off and put it on the green board. And we're just going to take the two ends of the wire here and twist them together, and then we'll snip off the bulk of it, put our P-clips back on, and now we can put the antenna on our side here. So we'll thread our bolts through again, and this is a tight fit, but it will push through. And put a bolt on, and don't tighten them until you get them both in. So this guy is going to be a pain. So I'm going to hold it with the pliers and push the P-clip over it, and then put the bolt on. You can tighten it. You don't want to over tighten them because they will go through the plastic here. So let's make our second electromagnet. You'll need to wrap it around something. You can use a screwdriver or a pen, whatever you use, just make sure it's not too thick. It's going to go in this spot here. I just use a screwdriver, and I'm going to wrap this by hand. So we can trim off the excess there, slide it off of our screwdriver, and we're left with a nice coil that's going to fit alongside there. And if I need to adjust it, I'll just slip it back onto the screwdriver so it holds that form. And bend it around until it looks like it's going to fit fine. Once you have the coil looking the way you want it to, we're going to be putting it just below the power wires here, and then into either of these slots below the resistors here. This wire is coated in a resin. Not all wires are the same, so they may be conductive. This piece of tape is going to protect all these components underneath here from accidentally getting shorted out by this coil that we're about to put over top of it. So we're going to lay this down and trim off the excess just so there's one hole up here and one hole down here that is left unexposed. Have the coil push through the tape on the back side, and you can just see where this coil is going to come out right next to the power wires here. And on the other side you can see that it's just below the resistors, and you can use any of these 6 holes that you can push it through, whatever fits best for the actual coil. My coil is coated in a resin. I can't solder directly to it, but I can solder to the tip of it, so I'm going to pre-trim that lead. But you can just see that the tip of our coil fitting through there, and we're going to solder to that tip. Being careful not to solder to the neighboring pin. You can see I did not succeed in soldering to there, so we're going to heat it up longer. Let's move on to the other side. I can just barely see the tip under there after trimming, so when I push down, it's going to push into that hole. Flipping this back over, that coil is nice and secure on there. At any point throughout the build, if you don't feel it straight, you can put the mold back on and move the coils up and down, and that will reset them into the shape. We're just going to trim up this black tape edge. So the next part we're going to install is the needle, which fits into this area. We're going to salvage it from this analog multimeter. Let's open this up. Okay, we don't need that. So this is the analog multimeter. We're going to salvage the needle here, and then we're also going to salvage this potentiometer on the side. Let's open this up. With that screw out of the way, this whole thing comes apart. So what we have here, this is the potentiometer that we need to salvage, and then this center needle assembly we need to salvage. Snip these wires, separating the circuit board from the needle assembly. And we're going to work the tabs and remove the circuit board. So now we have the needle assembly still in the housing, and then the circuit board removed, and the potentiometer we want to salvage. We won't need this red wheel. We just want this potentiometer out of here. We're just going to pre-wet these solder joints, so then they're easier to melt later. So holding on to the part with a pliers, what we can do is rock it back and forth while heating up the solder around it. And it's easier to start with the end that only has one. You can see that the part is starting to free from there. Let's do the other two. So we'll hold the part with our pliers again, heat up both of these in back and forth until it comes out. We have our potentiometer. Okay, now to get to the needle assembly. Okay, we're just removing this black shield. This is a sticker. Keep this, we're going to need it later. Keep that sticker safe. And now we can see the exposed needle assembly. So we're going to next remove this plastic front. It's the other thing we need to salvage. This is easier to do with an X-Acto knife. We're going to remove this front sticker. And that exposes the screw for the front window. And now we can remove the front cover. So I'm just pushing from the back side to free the bottom edge, and then this guy just lifts gently off. The needle assembly is fragile. Be careful over this next part. I would say just leave it in place until we're ready to install it over here. Okay, let's get our dust cover. And this is a 3D printed part that is going to take the place of this back housing. To get the dust cover ready, we're going to screw 2 holes in it. Using the green board as a stencil, we're going to screw 2 holes into the dust cover. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'm going to take these 2 screws out, save these 2 screws, we're going to need them. And the other thing I should mention is this electromagnet is a strong magnet. Anything magnetized nearby will get pulled into the magnet. So keep your work area clean. And we can check it with our screws, make sure that they're going to fit. Yep. We're ready to take the needle assembly out and then put the dust cover over the back side, and then we'll put that cover sticker back on too. So I'm just going to gently push this guy out. You see him just gently coming out. This is the needle assembly. To put this guy in here, we're going to thread some washers behind the screws, and then we'll put it into here, and then we'll slide the dust cover back over top and we'll screw it down. And we have to be careful because the washers will get pulled into the electromagnet. So without actually touching the needle, we'll slide these washers in. That's one. And 2. Okay, we're going to feed the wires through the hole, going to feed the needle through there, and we're going to push these screws through the hole. And everything's holding. On the back side, we're going to slide the dust cover in now. Fit the dust cover up to the holes. and come back over here and start tightening them in. So we have the dust cover on the back, we have the needle assembly on the front, and if I just touch the needle assembly, it's still free spinning. So this looks like a successful installation of the needle. So we're going to come to the back side and put that sticker cover back over top. We're leading the wires to where it says meter just below here. I'll put the cover back over. And there we go. Needle assembly is safe from everywhere but the front, which we're going to be putting a cover on shortly after we remove the sticker residue. We're going to start working on the photo to fit over the front. So we're going to take our case, use it as a stencil, and they're just going to score out some cutting lines. You can see the score. Let's cut this out. So now we have our photo backing, we have our front, and we have our needle installed here. And this card is going to be installed behind the needle. But first we need to make this hole. So let's slide this in. Being careful not to touch the needle too much. Put our cover over top. And there we go. So the cover is not secured right now, but the needle is safe underneath. Using the hot glue gun, we're going to add hot glue around the edges. And we'll do the sides. And you're not adding so much hot glue that is just everywhere. You're adding just enough that you cover the photo and the cover, keeping the edges down. The cover now has hot glue on it. We're just going to wait for it to cool down before continuing. You know the hot glue has cooled when it's taken on, goes from translucent to a cloudy color. So we're going to flip it over, and just because I don't trust those screws, we're going to hot glue this down too. Another one on this side. Just giving extra strength to this housing. Okay, and if you've done everything right up to this point, when you shake it slightly, you will see the needle bounce around, which means it's still free moving and installed correctly. So the last thing we have from the meter salvage is this potentiometer. But I can see that from our salvage the leads are bent, so I'm just going to make them a little prettier, clean up the excess solder on these edges. So I have a nice sharp lead to poke into the circuit board. Positioning of this, you want it about halfway in between the blue and the black parts here, and you want it down on this bottom rail, at least one pin. So when we flip it around to the back side, we can solder it down. Next up is the meter wiring. So the meter wiring, you can either trim it down shorter or leave it the same length. I like to leave it the same length, but we're going to look and see where it says meter directly next to the meter assembly, and there's two spots. One is plus, one is minus. The red wire is the plus, the black wire is the minus. So these are very thin wires. You need to make sure that you don't cut all the way through. So what I do instead is I cut part way through, and then I use my fingernail to break it the rest of the way. We're going to tin these wires. Tinning them just means put solder on there. I'm going to trim the tinned ends, but we're going to solder these in place, and I'm melting the soldered ends together. with batteries in here, we can power it on and see how our needle performs. So let's turn it on. And that's not bad. This last capacitor, the black cylindrical that we did not install in the first video, we're going to be installing it now, and you can see kind of where it goes. On the back, there's another circular pad here, and on the front, you can see two pins that look a little different. So let's solder that in. Trim the leads. The next step, we're going to be adding some wiring. So this is 10 conductor rainbow wire. And for length, I'm going to measure out an extra inch over here, and then an extra inch over here. So for the actual wire pattern, we're going to need to split these up into individual wires. Brown and red and orange, yellow, but then we're also going to need the black and put it aside. And it leaves us green, blue, purple, gray, and white. We're going to start with the black, yellow, orange, red, brown, and separating these out into individual wires. We're going to need the hot glue gun and the solder iron. Take our bundle of wires. These wires are going to feed through this hole right above the coil. So we're going to poke them through and pinch them off the back side. We're going to put some hot glue over top of it. Wait for our hot glue to dry. So these wires are going to be routed below and between these parts, and then we're going to separate them out over here. So for this next piece, we're going to be making wire clips, and I like to use solid core wire. I just remove the jacket and then use the pliers to bend it into a U shape. If I hold it up to the camera, you can see it a little better. It's a U-shape wire clip. So this U shape goes over top of all the wires in this corner, and then I push it down into the circuit board because we're going to solder it in place so the front looks as good as it can with these nice wire clips. So I have it through, so I'm just going to pull on the individual wires and get rid of the slack. Push this guy in and bend the leads so he doesn't come back out the other side, and we can solder them down. Trim the excess leads from the wire clip. So using the microscope, we can actually look what the wire clip looks like here. And that wire bundle just fits through there and looks really clean. Now we have to go through and separate these wires. So we take our brown wire and our red wire, feed it all the way along here, and we squeeze it underneath the antenna. And we take our remaining brown, black, and yellow wires, and we do the same thing where we squeeze it between these, and then these are going to be going below the blue potentiometer. Pinch them between there, and we feed them down through this edge hole. So let's flip it to the other side. So we remove the excess wires, we hold it down, and add hot glue. So now we can start on the second route of the wires. So I'm separating out the green, separating out the blue, purple, gray, and white. Make another U-clip. So we're going to put our wire bundle into this U-clip, and we're going to put our U-clip into this edge, and we're going to have just enough slack on the other side that we can wrap it behind and glue it. Bend our leads, and we solder our U-clip. Trim the excess leads from the U-clip, wrap these wires over the back, and add another glue dot. And just keep pinching them down until the glue cools. So before we wrap these wires over, we're going to add a strip of black electrical tape, and it's not full width. I'm going to cut it in half. So this half strip fits just below the LEDs and underneath the wire wrapping. Now we can put a U-clip in this corner. Slide over top the wires and then fit it into this corner. Pull the slack away and bend the leads over so it doesn't fall back out. Now we can solder it. This wiring is now going to come down all the way to this edge and wrap around the back. Make it pretty, and then before trimming it, I'm going to put a glue dot over the other side into this corner and just hold it down while it cools. So after the glue is cooled, we can trim back the wire. It's time to install the battery box. take the battery box lid, and what we're going to do is we're going to make 2 screw holes that are going to match the holes on the front of here. Hold it up next to it, and we're just going to make score marks on either side. Use the power drill and punch some holes in this guy. So we're going to take the screws, and we're screwing from the inside of the battery box to the outside edge. With the screws in place, we can put the standoffs on and tighten those. So we have the standoffs on the battery box lid, and we can put that on the back, and you can see that's going to sit over top of the needle assembly. So from the top side, the holes are covered by our tape, so we're just going to open those up with a screwdriver or knife, whatever you have. And washers are optional. I do use washers in this step. That way the screws don't dig into the tape. So just pull the wires out of the way, get the screw all the way down. Okay, with the screws up top, we can attach them to the standoffs and the battery box, making sure that the wires are not getting pinched by the screws. Just kind of move the wires back over top of the screws. And that's what a completed front looks like. We can put the battery box onto the battery box lid. These have been thread underneath the battery lid, and now we can trim them to where the battery terminal is. Wire strippers, okay, safety glasses, we're going to solder. So we're just going to pre-tin the leads here. I have not attached them yet, I just put a little solder on each wire. And the reason I pre-tin the wire is so then I don't have to push the wire through. Red to plus, black to minus, and I'm not pushing the wire in, I'm holding the wire up to the joint, and then I'm melting the 2 bits of solder together. And we're only missing one step, which is the speaker. This is the speaker here, and the speaker is going to go into the amplifier here. And the amplifier marked 4 to 8 ohms, minus plus. Don't worry too much about that, because the speaker is not polarized. You can put it in either spot. This here is a 3D printed part that's going to hold the speaker, and it's going to keep the speaker all by itself. Real nice. And that just screws onto the side of the battery box here. So the speaker holder is in place here, and with it unfolded we have access to the wiring. So let's trim that. And I'm just using my fingernail because the wire strippers have a tendency to cut the wire instead of stripping them. We're just going to pre-tin each joint, and then we'll bring them together. Speaker's connected, we'll slide it back into the holder, and then this whole thing folds away, and you just want it half sticking out the side. I think we're ready to power it on. Let's see how it sounds. Okay, battery's in place. Slide the battery onto the lid. On-off switch is on the battery box. So when we flip it over, we'll hit the power, and nothing happens because we are in the left position. Great. Extend the clip. See that the needle is moving, but we don't hear any audio. Well, we flip it to this position, we hear a sound that says left. Okay, so to get rid of that left sound, we're going to power the battery box off, and we're going to plug the micro USB into the computer, and it's going to mount as a flash device. So when it mounts, your PC will bring up a new flash drive with a single audio file on it, an OGG file. Delete that, and then we'll drag and drop our 5 wave clips in. Once the 5 files have been copied over, make sure that you eject the drive, do a safe eject, and then we'll unplug it. So the audio file should now be programmed on here. When I turn it back on and flip it to prop mode, hey, look at that! We got ourselves a really nice functional EMF reader. Enjoy, guys. That's the end of our video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy your new EMF reader. Till next time.